While other gangsters shouted and threatened, Carlo Gambino chose to speak softly. While wealthy mafiosi often flaunted their luxury, Gambino maintained a modest appearance, more like a friendly grocer than a mafia boss. When thugs mocked or menaced, Gambino simply stayed silent, smiled, and seemed ready to walk away, unconcerned. Physically, Carlo Gambino was not an intimidating figure. If the Mafia had a dodgeball team, he might have been picked last. Don Joe Bonanno once described him as a small, timid, and unassuming man. On the other hand, NYPD Chief of Detectives Albert Anastasia said Gambino resembled a snake, one that would lie still and play dead until danger had passed. But that was all part of the act. From an early age, Gambino had learned the value of being underestimated. He wanted others to believe he posed no serious threat, and those who bought into that image often ended up shocked. This strategy paid off handsomely. Gambino rose to lead the most powerful crime family in America for nearly 2 decades. Despite a criminal career spanning more than 50 years, he served only 22 months in prison. In the end, he died peacefully at home, something most gangsters never lived to experience. In that sense, it's no exaggeration to say that Carlo Gambino may have been the most successful mafia boss in American history. As always, before diving into the full story, please consider hitting the like button to support ADB Crime Case. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified about our latest investigations. Now let's begin. Carlo Gambino was born on either August 24th or September 1st, 1902. Historians still debate the exact date. In Palermo, Sicily, the son of Tommaso Gambino and Felice Castellano. Like many future mobsters, Carlo grew up in a world already dominated by the Mafia, known in Palermo as the honored society. They had money, power, and respect, everything a man could desire. Gambino longed to follow their path, to become a man of honor and enjoy the privileges that came with it. Unlike most, he had a distinct advantage: family connections. His mother's family, the Castellanos, were already tied into mafia networks in both Palermo and New York, making his entry into the life far easier than most. As a young man, Gambino was hardworking, intelligent, and eager to please. He quickly became seen as a strong candidate for initiation. At just 19, Gambino was formally inducted into the honored society, swearing a blood oath never to betray his brothers. On December 23, 1921, he boarded the SS Vincenzo Florio and entered the United States illegally through Norfolk, Virginia. Hidden among barrels of olive oil and Marsala wine. Unlike most immigrants, Gambino's arrival in America was smooth. Mafia relatives had already arranged everything. Immigration officials had been bribed, and a cousin was waiting for him at the dock to bring him to a newly rented apartment on Navy Street near the Brooklyn waterfront. He was given a job at a trucking company owned by the Castellano family, though that position was mostly for show. The Mafia didn't smuggle men across the Atlantic just to hire drivers. Instead, Carlo was quickly introduced to his cousin's underworld contacts, who needed help running illegal operations. Prohibition was in full swing, and bootlegging was the fastest way to make money. Before long, Gambino was working in the liquor racket for New York's most powerful mob boss, Giuseppe "Joe the Boss" Masseria. The 1920s were relatively uneventful for Gambino. He worked as a low-level bootlegger for Masseria in Brooklyn, participating in operations that produced illegal liquor, smuggled rum from the Caribbean, and coerced speakeasy owners into buying alcohol exclusively from Masseria's organization. During this time, Gambino also met a group of rising underworld figures who would shape the future of organized crime in America. Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Vito Genovese, and Frank Costello. The 1930s brought far more drama, beginning with the Castellamarese War, which dramatically shifted New York's underworld power structure. For most of the 1920s, Masseria had been the city's top gangster, but a Sicilian rival named Salvatore Maranzano challenged him. Maranzano ultimately prevailed when Lucky Luciano betrayed Masseria, arranging his assassination. With Joe the Boss dead, Maranzano reorganized New York's underworld into the 5 families. He placed himself at the head of the strongest family, while rewarding Luciano with leadership of his own. The other 3 families went to Joe Profaci, Vincent Mangano, and Tommy Galliano. Notably, the Mangano family would one day be inherited by Carlo Gambino. Yet Maranzano proved little better than Masseria. He expected everyone to treat him as boss of all bosses and demanded a share of all operations. Many mobsters wanted a more democratic system, so Luciano and his allies arranged Maranzano's assassination as well. They then created the Commission, a board to resolve disputes and oversee business. In theory, all members were equals, but in practice, Lucky Luciano was the undisputed first among them. Gambino, meanwhile, kept a low profile, serving as a loyal soldier in the Mangano family under Vincent Mangano and his brother Philip. He rose alongside 2 very different personalities. One was Joe Adonis, a flashy braggart who specialized in political connections, bribes, and favors. The other was Albert Anastasia, known as the Mad Hatter and the Lord High Executioner. Anastasia was a violent enforcer with a shoot first, ask later philosophy, Mangano's go-to man whenever someone needed intimidation or elimination. The 1930s proved to be a turning point for Carlo Gambino. While many gangsters abandoned bootlegging once prohibition ended, Gambino saw opportunity. He believed there would always be a market for cheap, strong liquor, even if legal alcohol returned. So instead of shutting down, he doubled down. He bought used distilling equipment from out-of-work bootleggers at bargain prices and expanded operations. By the mid-1930s, Gambino controlled one of the largest liquor rackets in New York City, reaping enormous profits. His efficiency didn't go unnoticed. Vincent Mangano rewarded him with a promotion to capo regime, a captain with his own crew. On the personal side, Gambino strengthened his ties to the Castellano family by marrying his cousin Catherine Castellano in 1932. Together, they would raise 4 children, but not everything went smoothly. Law enforcement was beginning to take notice of Gambino's activities. In 1930, he was arrested in Lawrence, Massachusetts, as a suspicious person, but released without charge. That same year, he was accused of theft in Brockton, then failed to appear in court, resulting in an arrest warrant. He wasn't caught until 5 years later, but even then the charges were dropped after he quietly repaid $1,000 in restitution. His luck finally ran out in 1937. Gambino was convicted of federal tax evasion tied to liquor in Philadelphia and sentenced to 22 months at Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. It would be the only prison term of his long criminal career. The 1940s were a boom decade for Gambino. While World War II disrupted life for many Americans, Gambino thrived. He made fortunes by illegally trading ration stamps purchased from corrupt officials in the Office of Price Administration. He diversified heavily, investing in a wide range of businesses: restaurants, nightclubs, bakeries, factories, meat markets, olive oil importing firms, trucking companies, and even pizzerias. By the end of the decade, Gambino was one of the wealthiest members of the Mangano crime family. But internal problems brewed within the Mangano organization. Tensions escalated between boss Vincent Mangano and his volatile underboss, Albert Anastasia. Unlike the quiet Gambino, Anastasia was infamous for his ruthlessness. Though technically loyal to Mangano, he preferred socializing with power players like Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello. It was remarkable Anastasia lasted 20 years under Mangano, but by 1951, his ambition could no longer be contained. On April 19th of that year, both Vincent Mangano and his brother Philip were eliminated. Philip's body was discovered in Brooklyn's Sheepshead Bay wetlands, shot 3 times in the head. Vincent's body was never found, though his fate was obvious. One might assume murdering the head of a major New York crime family would cause uproar on the commission. But Anastasia was simply too dangerous and too well connected. Frank Costello, then acting head of Luciano's family, strongly supported him. With Lucky Luciano exiled to Italy, Costello's influence was weaker than before, so he needed allies. Anastasia fit the bill perfectly. Thanks to Costello's persuasion, the other bosses agreed to recognize Anastasia as head of the Mangano family. Life went on. Under Anastasia, 3 key lieutenants stood out: Frank Scalise, Joe Adonis, and Carlo Gambino. On the surface, this looked like a golden opportunity for Gambino. But behind the scenes, things were more complicated. Anastasia frequently belittled Gambino, assigning him trivial tasks or even threatening him physically. He dismissed Gambino as a small-time player, ignoring the fact that Carlo was quietly one of the family's biggest earners. Most gangsters would not have tolerated such disrespect. But Gambino, true to form, responded with polite smiles and submissive gestures. To outsiders, it looked like cowardice. In truth, Gambino was waiting, watching for the perfect moment when Anastasia would be vulnerable. That moment would come soon enough. Anastasia's fate was tied to Frank Costello. The two relied on each other. To remove one, both had to be eliminated. Fortunately for Gambino, he found an ambitious ally in Vito Genovese, a powerful member of Luciano's old family. Genovese had always resented Costello for taking the reins after Luciano's deportation. Hungry for control, he was plotting his own takeover. Together, Genovese and Gambino formed an unspoken alliance. The circle around Anastasia began to collapse. In 1956, Joe Adonis accepted deportation to avoid a long prison stretch, taking himself out of the picture. Then, on May 2, 1957, Costello was shot outside his Manhattan apartment building on Genovese's orders. He survived with only a minor head wound, but the close call convinced him to retire and hand control to Genovese. With Costello out of the way, only Anastasia remained. On the morning of October 25, 1957, Albert Anastasia sat in a barber's chair at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. Without warning, 2 masked gunmen stormed in, shoved the barber aside, and opened fire. In the chaos, Anastasia rose, seemingly ready to fight, but in his panic, he lunged at the gunman's reflections in a wall mirror instead of the attackers themselves. Seconds later, he collapsed in a hail of bullets, dead on the floor of the barber shop. The Mad Hatter was gone, and Gambino's patience was about to be rewarded. With Anastasia dead, Costello retired, and Luciano exiled in Italy, the stage was set for a massive redistribution of mafia power in New York. Carlo Gambino emerged as the natural successor to lead the Mangano family. Once he took the reins, the family was renamed in his honor, the Gambino crime family. From then on, he would be known simply as Don Carlo. But while becoming boss of his own family was significant, Gambino's ambitions extended much further. His true goal was control over the Commission, the governing council of the American Mafia. That role, however, fell first to his new ally Vito Genovese, who declared himself chairman after forcing Costello into retirement. Genovese sought to cement his dominance with a grand display of power. In November 1957, he organized a historic Mafia summit at the home of mobster Joseph Barbara in Apalachin, New York. Bosses from across the United States were summoned to attend. It was meant to be Genovese's coronation as the undisputed leader of organized crime. But things went disastrously wrong. Local police noticed the sudden influx of expensive cars with out-of-state plates at Barbara's rural estate. Suspicious, they raided the property. Dozens of mobsters fled into the woods or across open fields, some even abandoning their expensive suits and shoes in the mud. More than 60 men were detained and questioned. The Apalachin raid became a national scandal, exposing the Mafia to public view in a way never seen before. Law enforcement, politicians, and the press now had undeniable proof of the nationwide organization that had long been dismissed as myth. For Genovese, the raid was a humiliation. Instead of cementing his position, it painted him as reckless and drew government attention directly to him. Carlo Gambino, ever the patient strategist, saw opportunity in Genovese's misstep. Although Gambino had initially aligned with Genovese, he never fully trusted him, viewing him as greedy, erratic, and dangerous. Behind the scenes, Gambino began quietly collaborating with Genovese's enemies, Frank Costello, Lucky Luciano, and Meyer Lansky. Direct confrontation would have been suicidal. Genovese was still too powerful. But Gambino and his allies devised another method: the law. According to Luciano's later memoirs, he and Gambino arranged to pay a small-time Puerto Rican criminal named Nelson Cantelops $100,000 to testify that he had personally witnessed Genovese purchase large shipments of heroin. Federal narcotics agents, desperate to take down Genovese, eagerly accepted the testimony. In 1958, Genovese was indicted along with 24 associates on federal drug trafficking charges. The following year, he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He would die behind bars a decade later. With Genovese gone, the chairmanship of the commission was once again vacant, and this time, there was only one man left to claim it: Carlo Gambino. The small, quiet man who once seemed unremarkable had risen to become the most powerful mafia boss in America. Under Don Carlo's leadership, the Gambino family became the most dominant criminal organization in the United States during the 1960s. They controlled virtually all rackets connected to the Brooklyn waterfront, the docks, and most importantly, the international traffic flowing through John F. Kennedy International Airport. Gambino also wielded immense influence over the Teamsters Union, ensuring that virtually every shipment entering or leaving New York passed through his hands, or at least paid a tax to his family. As always, he invested illicit profits into legitimate fronts: trucking companies, garment businesses, restaurants, and more. These enterprises served not only as money laundering outlets, but also as additional sources of real revenue and influence. Yet power came with new dangers. The Gambinos' growing strength bred resentment among rival families, who watched their own shares of the criminal economy shrink. Fortunately, Gambino understood the value of alliances. He forged a particularly strong bond with Tommy Lucchese, head of the Lucchese crime family. To cement the relationship, the two arranged a marriage between their children, tying their bloodlines together in true dynastic fashion. Still, three other families, the Genovese, the Bonanno, and the Colombo, formerly Profaci, remained unpredictable and at times hostile. Trouble was brewing. By the early 1960s, Carlo Gambino's dominance was clear, but not everyone accepted it quietly. Joe Bonanno, head of the Bonanno family, harbored a deep dislike for Don Carlo. In 1963, Bonanno began secretly plotting what would have been the boldest strike in Mafia history: the assassination of Gambino, his ally Tommy Lucchese, and other commission leaders. If successful, the plot could have reshaped the entire American underworld. But once again, Gambino's quiet luck and his reputation for patience served him well. Bonanno conspired with Joe Magliocco, the new boss of the Profaci family, who was struggling to maintain control after Joe Profaci's death. Together, they recruited a young mobster named Joe Colombo to carry out the hit on Gambino and Lucchese. But Colombo saw more value in loyalty to Gambino than in fulfilling Bonanno's suicidal plan. He tipped off Gambino about the conspiracy. The betrayal sealed Bonanno's fate. As a reward for his loyalty, Gambino supported Colombo's promotion. He became the new head of the old Profaci family, which was renamed the Colombo family in his honor. That left only two questions: what to do with Bonanno and with Magliocco. Bonanno fled north to Montreal the moment he learned his plot had been exposed. He returned a few years later and, remarkably, was allowed to retire quietly in Arizona. Magliocco, meanwhile, stayed behind and confessed his role, begging for forgiveness. To everyone's surprise, he received it. He was permitted to retire so long as he relinquished control of his family to Colombo. Later that same year, Magliocco died of a heart attack. Rumors swirled that he had been poisoned, but a later autopsy found no trace of toxins. Gambino had once again sidestepped danger, turning enemies into non-threats and allies into loyalists. With the Bonanno and Colombo situations resolved, only the Genovese family remained as a potential rival. By this time, Vito Genovese was still alive but imprisoned, ruling his family from behind bars. A man named Tommy Eboli served as his acting boss, but Eboli wanted the position permanently. To fund his rise, he borrowed millions from the commission, money that came primarily from Carlo Gambino. Eboli invested heavily in a drug operation, but the scheme collapsed. He was unable to repay the debt. On a July night in 1972, Eboli's body was discovered slumped outside his car, riddled with 5 bullets to the head and neck. His murder shocked the underworld, though few doubted who had ordered it. Frank Funzi Thierry was then installed as the new acting boss of the Genovese family, with Gambino's blessing. Many speculated that Gambino had orchestrated Eboli's downfall all along, replacing him with a more loyal figure. With that, Carlo Gambino had neutralized the last of his major rivals. By the 1970s, Gambino's empire was unrivaled. He had outmaneuvered every rival, cemented his control over the commission, and stood as the most powerful mafia boss in the United States. But there was one adversary he could not escape: time itself. Gambino's health had been fragile since the 1950s. In his later years, this frailty ironically helped him avoid deportation hearings, as immigration authorities deemed him too ill to expel. But by the 1970s, age and illness had taken their toll. He withdrew increasingly into private life, running the family from his modest home in Massapequa, Long Island. Despite his quiet surroundings, his words still carried the weight of an empire. On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino died of natural causes at the age of 74. Unlike most mob bosses, he passed peacefully in his own bed. In a controversial decision, he named his cousin Paul Castellano as successor rather than his underboss and longtime right-hand man, Agnello della Croce. The move caused deep resentment within the family and planted the seeds of a future civil war. That war would eventually bring to power another notorious name in Mafia history: John Gotti, the Teflon Don.